When I was 10 years old in 1999, my two older brothers and I did the small town paper route. We would load into my mom's Ford SUV, and she would drive us to the proper blocks, and we would all hop out and toss papers onto people's patios. One December evening, after the paper route was finished and the sun began to set, my parents decided to take us around the small town to look at the Christmas lights and decorations on houses. I had the back three-person seat all to myself and was laying down looking out the window, occasionally sitting up to look at the more interesting Christmas decorations. As we were driving around, I was the only one laying down and looking out the window toward the sky as I was laying on my back and looking out the backseat window. Suddenly, a large, orange, glowing disc appeared out of nowhere and seemed to be hovering over our car, about 100 feet. It had the glow of a dim orange star, with 4 graded rectangles bent into a circle around the bottom. The rectangles looked like they were covered in some sort of chain link fencing. That's the best way I can describe it. I stared up at this light for a solid 5 seconds, before something in my brain said, "Holy shit, stop being amazed and shock and awe, and tell your family." I jolted up out of my seat and yelled for my brothers to look at the sky. I quickly looked back too, and it was gone. It just vanished. I have never forgotten what I saw. I'm no artist, but this is the best representation I can make. Whether you choose to believe my encounter, that's up to you. I'm only sharing it because it's impossible to talk to friends or family about it. I have much better things to do than post fairy tales online. I'm just here to share my story without the fear of ridicule. The opinions of online trolls doesn't bother me in the least. My friends and family thinking I've gone crazy does. So, here goes. I was out jogging in the middle of the afternoon one day. It was a beautiful day. No clouds, blue sky, maybe 75 degrees out. As I was jogging, a huge red flash appeared in the sky. It was so bright, it made my eyes squint. And when I looked up, I was looking at something completely unknown to me. I assumed I would know a UFO if I ever saw one. I could literally feel my brain trying to tell my eyes what I was looking at, and just not being able to. I'd say it took about 15 to 20 seconds before I realized a massive, beige-colored triangular aircraft was just above the trees, just up in front of me. I was surrounded by 3 balls of light. 2 balls of light were behind the aircraft, and one was out in front, strangely also in a triangle pattern. They were so bright I couldn't see any shape. They looked as bright as stars. I could just see what appeared to be a super shiny metal, but no shape. I'm not convinced it was metal either. It was comparable to staring at the sun, and that's how bright the balls of light were. The beige triangle was probably the length of 2 or 3 passenger airliners. It was completely silent. It was very thick too, like a few stories high. The top of the triangle had what I could best describe as a boiling cloud around the top of it, similar to boiling water, but a cloud boiling instead of water. It was very strange. The bottom of the triangle had 3 massive lights, 2 red and 1 white. They began rotating in sequence. The red one would come on, get super bright, dim out, then the next red came on and did the same thing, followed by the white light. It repeated that sequence the entire time. What had me mesmerized was this wasn't light from light bulbs. This was like starlight or something. I remember just thinking that I need to run up directly under it and look at where the light is coming from. There weren't bulbs or anything. The bottom looked like it had open voids where the light was coming out from. It was very, very strange. Now, here's where the story takes a hard left. As I was standing there, I suddenly noticed all sound was gone. I didn't hear any traffic or anything. I also noticed the green grass and blue sky seemed more vibrant. Just a different shade, I guess. I also felt like I was standing 3 feet in the air, even though I was definitely on the ground. Like standing on a pitcher's mound is the best way I can describe it. I remember seeing a man on a bicycle coming from behind me toward the aircraft. I went to yell at him to get him to look up, but it seemed like he was so far away that yelling was pointless, even though it looked to me like he was about 10 feet away. When I looked at him, he was in slow motion. He's on a bicycle and I'm standing still, and it took what felt like minutes for him to cover 30 to 50 yards. He also never seemed to see me or any of the UFOs. Then, off to my left, further up in the sky, a second base triangle literally appeared out of thin air, blinked all 3 lights at once, vanished, reappeared, flashed all 3 lights again, and just vanished. It didn't fly in and out. It appeared and then disappeared. I can't describe to you why or how, but I know that thing flashed its lights at me. I can only describe a feeling of mutual acknowledgement to each other's presence. I know how crazy that sounds. After that, I could hear sound again. The colors went back to normal. I was back on the ground. The 3 balls of light were gone, and the triangle began to slowly rise straight up. It took maybe 5 to 7 minutes to get out of my view. I can remember seeing its light still rotating way up in the sky. The total encounter was probably about 12 minutes. When I turned around, about maybe 200 yards away, were 2 police vehicles, totally tinted windows. They definitely weren't there when I first arrived in the area. I ran the other way. They never got out or chased me or anything. So, believe what you want, but I know what the truth is, and I agree with the famous saying that humans are not ready for contact yet. This is much deeper than beings from other planets just visiting Earth. Thanks for letting me vent anonymously. This started in the late winter of 1978. There was 3 of us. Myself, Ronnie, and Tom. We were working at an outdoor education program high in the San Bernardino Mountains. The outdoor school had taken over a summer camp for the winter semester. This camp was located in a saddle in the mountains, where the mountains narrowed and bent from the tectonic forces that created them. The camp was reached by the rim of the World Highway, which formed the western edge of the camp's property. The rim road ran right along the edge of the mountains, with the camp on one side of the road and a steep drop-off on the other side. The road crossed one of the many rock falls, narrow, rock-filled canyons that start at the top of the mountain and plunge thousands of feet down towards the Los Angeles basin. We had snuck out to this rockfall this particular night because we knew that the view of the city lights would be spectacular. The Santa Ana, or devil winds, had been blowing from the desert up over the mountains and down into the Los Angeles basin for the previous 3 days. The Santa Anas had scrubbed every molecule of smog out of the basin, offering a crystal clear and unobstructed view from 7,000 feet. All the way down the canyon to the city lights below. When we arrived at our spot just before midnight, the scene could not have been more spectacular. Standing on the other side of the highway, in a small paved pullout, the city lights were spread out in front of us like a giant, multicolored carpet of glowing geometric shapes. The major thoroughfares were lit up in different colors, depending on the jurisdiction's choice of streetlights. Red and white moving snakes of traffic could be seen thousands of feet below. Even at this time of night, we could see all the way down to where the lights ended, and the Pacific Ocean lay in darkness. We stood in a loose circle, myself, Tom, and Ronnie, huddled up and excited about the amazing sight below us. Ronnie was the one that got down to business, pulling out one of his famous hand-rolled joints. He lit it, as per tradition, and took one hit of it, waving it in the air as if he was telling a story. Following the red, cherry arc through the air as Ronnie gesticulated is how I first noticed a bright, orange-white light coming over the top of the mountain behind us. It backlit the mountain and quickly was over the top, traveling down our side of the mountain, following the canyon down towards the basin. We all noticed the change in brightness and turned toward its origin. At first, I heard no sounds, but as it grew closer, coming down the mountain and the next canyon over, I heard a sound that, to me, sounded like what I'd imagine an object creating its own vacuum in the atmosphere would sound like. Like the air itself was being ripped asunder. There were no aircraft noise, just a sudden vacuum, and an empty place in the air. The UFO was vaguely pumpkin seed shaped, with a very bright, reddish orange glow at the thicker head of the seed, and an orangish white vapor trailing behind. It came over the mountain and down the canyon at a constant height of 100 feet above the mountain, lighting the ground under it. It followed the contour of the canyon until it reached approximately 2,000 feet above the basin below, where it leveled out and traveled west toward the ocean. It dropped 4,000 to 5,000 feet down the canyon below us and a couple of miles to the west of us in less than 10 seconds. The craft was clearly visible, vibrantly glowing, as it traversed at a high rate of speed along its path west. Also clearly visible were the running lights of a small plane flying in a westerly direction ahead of the UFO. As we watched the blinking lights of the small craft, we witnessed the UFO rapidly decelerating from its incredible speed down the mountain, and then stop right next to the small plane. From our vantage point up on the mountain, the UFO was to the left and looked to be at the same altitude and extremely close to the small plane. After matching the plane's speed and vector for 3 seconds, the UFO suddenly accelerated forward, turned to the left, and disappeared over the Pacific toward Mexico. It went from the easternmost part of the Los Angeles basin down towards Long Beach and out of sight in less than a couple of seconds, leaving behind only a faint, orange plasma trail and a pilot with the sudden need to change his underwear. We stood transfixed, staring at the empty space where the UFO had been, and then all looking at each other with a mix of awe and panic in our eyes. Ronnie very slowly and deliberately crushed out the joint on the heel of his boot and put it in his pocket. Then we all started talking at once. "What the fuck was that? Where did it go? Did you see it stop next to the plane? What can do that? Nothing, that's what." It was at this point that the panic kicked in. We all looked at each other once, and then took off running at full speed back toward our cabins. We didn't speak of it until the next time we could be together, without anybody else around, because how do you explain crazy talk like that? We had seen a lot of weird shit in our collective lifetimes, but none of us could explain what we saw that night. We tried to figure out how we could get some information on what we might have seen. However, we were stuck up in the mountains 5 days a week without TV, newspapers, or radio, and this was way before the internet. This sighting, it became the pivot point between the three of us, something we would always discuss and try to figure out, but never could. After the semester was over, we all went our separate ways that summer, Ronnie went into the California Department of Forestry as a wildland firefighter. Tom traveled to Hawaii to work at a YMCA summer camp, and I headed back to Big Bear to work at a YMCA summer camp there. And this is where the story gets really weird. Neither Ronnie nor Tom lived to see the end of that summer. Ronnie was killed in the Spanish branch fire up near San Luis Obispo. Then, less than 2 weeks after learning that Ronnie was dead, I learned that Tom had disappeared off the coast of Hawaii. The story is that he was on the beach and got swept out to sea by a rogue wave, and then was eaten by sharks, and his body was never found. To say that I was mentally shaken would be an understatement. To have two of your friends who had witnessed an unearthly UFO encounter die in unusual ways within 6 months of seeing this UFO, one by fire and one by water, really freaked me out for a very, very long time. I kept thinking fire, water, earth, air. There were many years after this that I wouldn't put myself in any situation where one of those elements could kill me. So, that's my UFO story. I still do not know what happened that night. All I know is that it was completely mind-boggling and changed my life irrevocably. I know what happened to Ronnie and have visited the site where he perished. Tom, on the other hand, may still be alive, as I have a strong feeling that he may have faked his own death. But that's a story for another time.